I just spent some time studying with the Claremont boys out there in Las Vegas at the fellowship. Okay. One of the things that we really was struck by when I'm reading original texts from the founders, John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, all these guys, not only just around the Federalist and the Constitution, but around state constitutions and the discussions around state constitutions, right? So you get real context. It's not just the federal thing. It's in every state from everybody. And they all firmly believed a couple of following facts. One, that you have to build the government like a coat to suit the individual. Okay? It has to be specific to the people. Two, that the American people were a unique set of people bound by language, culture, history, stories, experiences, blood, race, religion, and so forth. And so therefore that the American government was built as a coat to suit these unique people. And we can't take that coat. Tim, imagine if we took my jacket and put it on you.
I'd be really warm.
You'd be really warm, and you'd be swimming, and you'd be half lost in that thing, right?
I could probably pitch a tent, put a stick up, and then just sit under
pitch a tent, he said.
Yes.
Get a little fire going.
So if you gave me your jacket, I put it on, I flex, and I bust the seams out like the Hulk. It's the disaster, right?
Yeah, but it looks cool.
In slow motion.
So this is what our country was founded. This is not just like one guy's idea. This was the entirety of the people founding our country understood that our people were unique, our history was unique, our language and religion and culture were unique, and the government that we built was unique for those people. So this idea that we can take what we have here for us, a special kind of people, and like just universally apply it across the world is asinine.
Well, what about Bitcoin? I mean, I think that we've universally spread a concept globally where we're globalizing under a currency.
Yeah, but that's just the idea of money exists everywhere.
Commerce exists everywhere.
Exactly. On Earth,
but you know, I'll put it this way.
To.
I'm 50-50. I think there needs to be strong international ties, but there needs to be sovereign respect. So what I mean to say is there something we can do to make sure that a country's borders, laws, and customs are respected, and we prevent war. We prevent major, serious international conflict and destruction and Havana syndrome or nuclear weapons.
What's funny is that the wars that we have been involved in are because we want to exert our way of life on other people.
I'll tell you. Here's the problem. It's utopian.
Yes.
I think globalization is very, very likely, and the issue is there are people who are willing to die for their ideology or seriously harm others, and there are people who aren't. And you know, the United States is a bunch of hyper individualistic, right-wing nut jobs in the middle of the woods with a bunch of guns. And I mean that in the best way possible. I mean, like, we got a whole bunch of people who are sitting on a mound of beans with guns and be like, I'm not going to bother you, you don't bother me. And I'm like, right on, brother.
Yes.
So it's very hard to conquer. That's not everybody, though. There are a lot of countries where they're like, you know, my God is the one true God, therefore, and they're gonna fight and they're gonna attack. And then you have communists who have found subversion to be the powerful method. And so now you might have that hyper individualistic dude who's, you know, living in the mountains, who's minding his own business respectfully, peacefully, and he's well prepared. But all around him, the cities are falling to subversive ideologies to submit, to break apart. We have a relatively decentralized system here compared to many other places.
Yeah, by design, yeah.
By design. And so you can subvert that. And that's what communists and Marxists and others have been doing. So ultimately, what I see is those who are willing to oppress, lie, cheat, and steal have a major advantage, and they've been winning in that front.
And that's because the difference between what we have here and what they have there, and at least at the time of the founding and for most of American existence, was that the American citizenry was devout Christian. Okay? And so this is the fundamental issue, is that our Declaration of Independence is based on natural law and natural rights, which come from the Creator. And in a Christian belief, the Creator is a monotheistic God. So there's only one God. And if you've got other gods, you're wrong. So we have one God, natural law, natural rights, American constitutional republic. That's the direct lineage in the Declaration of Independence, and that's what everybody at the time thought when they signed the thing. And so if you believe at the same time that there's only one God and that everybody else's God is wrong, well, then there's almost a compulsion to spread that ideology to other people. But I think that what we need to do is just respect the fact that other people have different ideas. And I interviewed Alexander Dugin, the Russian philosopher who pushes his ethnic multipolarity ideas. because he believes that people are different based on their geography and their location and their history and who they are inside, etc., and that they evolve into needing different political regimes. People have evolved to need different political regimes. The Chinese, for example, have evolved in their own civilization, in their own context, with their own everything. So they've evolved their own political regime, just like we have here in the West.
But population growth will lead to borders pressing on borders. There's no free land anymore for the most part. There's like some rock, like volcanic rock I was looking at down by Antarctica that's like
doing
unclaimed.
the same thing, trying to find unclaimed land.
Doesn't exist.
You can build islands.
Yeah. Sure. But the point is that we've reached. It used to be like, oh, okay, it's no big deal because there were a lot of places that were just open and
send them to the colonies. Right?
Yeah, and they're ill-defined territories. So people who are like
people with claims. Remember when there was just like claims on land? Mm-hmm. Well, we claim this and we claim that. No, now there's nations everywhere.
I have a weak claim on your
So now
land.
what happens when China says we need to expand, and as we expand, we need more resources, and we can't get access to resource X because it's not within our borders. Let's go ask them for it. What would you want? We'll not give you anything for this resource, but we have to have it. Otherwise, our people are suffering. When a population of any species grows too large and the amount of resources levels out, everyone suffers. You see it in every overpopulated species, deer, pigs, turkeys, whatever. They become sickly, they become malnourished, and they fight, become aggressive because there's just enough resources to sustain their current level of population. So then what do you think is going to happen to people? When in a country like China with 1.4 billion, they're like, we got to get food somehow. We're importing it from Australia. What happens when these other countries start saying, we're not going to give it to you? Well, we're not going to sit here and die. And now that there's no unclaimed land, someone's going to have to give up what they did claim.
Well, you bring up an interesting point, which is that every other country around the world shares the perspective that I am putting forth right now, which is that there is no universal morality, no universal virtue, no universal political regime, no universal constitution that should be applied, no universal rights, none of it. No one else believes that except for us.
Well, there is a universal thing is economics. It permeates everything. A bank can cut your account. They can remove you. If you want to talk about disrupting the decentralized union of the United States, communism, but banking.
No,
they can
hear
remove.
What you're saying. I hear what you're saying. Can we just finish this one thought before we get on to that, which is to say that the Chinese people aren't looking at their Chinese government being like, everybody here needs to be Chinese all around the world. We're going to export Chinese ideology everywhere. No, they're thinking mercantilist, right? And that's one thing that we haven't woken up to is the fact that China is mercantilist. Their national trade policy is to enhance their national standing and the good benefit to their people. Okay, that's why they do trade, which is to make their nation stronger as a nation for foreign policy and national domestic policy issues. But they're not out there trying to say everybody needs to be Chinese Communist Party. No, they're like, we want that food. We're going to go get it, which is a totally different perspective than what we have, which is like we have to end tyranny all around the world.
Yeah, but that idea of ending tyranny is propaganda. It was a way to sell war to people because we want to extract resources.
No, it's definitely not. It's 100% not. It goes all the way back to Woodrow Wilson.
It goes back to the Romans.
It goes back.
They conquered in the name of defense.
I will say, at least in America, it goes back to Woodrow Wilson and the initiation of the progressive policy and modernity and scientific method, and the improvement of everything can be reduced. And we can eliminate evil and we can eliminate disease. It's reflected in the COVID zero policies that people have, especially in Australia and what's in America as well. It's this idea that we can perfect things. So if there's evil out there, we can perfect it.
But I disagree. We did not get involved in Syria because we wanted to bring freedom and Bashar al-Assad was an evil dictator. It's because for a long time we've been trying to build a pipeline, the Qatar-Turkey pipeline, and Syria said we will not go against the wishes of our ally Russia, who says no to this because they want more control through Gazprom, et cetera, et cetera.
True.
And so then back in 2009, The Guardian reported this a couple years later, that the U.S. said we will have ground troops in Syria soon, within the next few years. And then surprise, surprise, as soon as there's an opportunity for the U.S. to get involved and give weapons, it's interesting.
You're pointing out competing factions. Let me
say something interesting. In the American Revolution, the French say we're at war with the British. Hey, these colonists are going to help us. Let's supply them with arms. And then it worked, and the Americans get independence. In Syria, the U.S. sees this uprising, and they're like, and depending on who you ask, by the way, because the leftists will say it was a CIA conspiracy from the get-go, but they see this opportunity with this uprising, and they're like, we should arm some of these people. because we don't like Bashar al-Assad. So they intervene to provide resources to the competing faction, hoping that once it topples, we'll be able to build that pipeline. Nothing to do with freedom. Everything to do with opportunistic oil pipeline building.
I agree with that. I think what you're pointing out are competing factions within the United States foreign policy apparatus. You're pointing out factions where people have like monetary interests at heart, but at the same time there is this progressive ideology in our foreign policy, in our domestic policy, that's reflected in the gender policy and the Marxist policy and the feminist policy and the critical race theory policy, which is all about like perfecting things and making things perfect through science and the scientific method and like eradicating evil and spreading freedom and all the great things that we have all around the country.
Did you see the report from Project Veritas?
About the teacher?
The teacher in California who's got Mao. He got Mao on his wall.
Sure. I have 180 days to turn these kids into revolutionaries.
Yeah. I think this is one of Veritas's most important stories, to be honest. And it's like some random dopey dude. But this is important because, you know, a lot of us are familiar with the goings-on of Google because everyone's got their complaints. The left says, oh, it's a monopoly that won't ban hate speech. And everyone's kind of focused on them and complaining. And the censorship stuff's overt. But we keep hearing these stories about children being indoctrinated, and they say, oh, that's not happening, it's not happening. Veritas then finds just one guy, one little old teacher who comes out and says, here's my Antifa flag, here's my Mao poster, and I tell kids they're bad people if they disagree with me, and then they move further left every single year, and you're like, these people are real. And what you don't realize is the one guy they call, it's like a cockroach. You see one on the wall, you know what that means? There's 1,000 more behind it. So for Veritas to expose the one guy is just the beginning. There needs to be more exposure to this. But man, I tweeted this out somewhat jokingly.
Your Twitter's all jokes.
It mostly is, but I said, imagine hating your kids so much you send them to college.
Right.
Because like what happens to your kids when you send them to these institutionalized learning facilities?
Rotted.
They shave their heads and, you know, put on weird art clothes. And
so I'm dealing with that right now. My daughter is 16 years old. She's looking at colleges. She's a very successful active junior, straight A's, varsity athlete, can go any college she wants to in the country. And she wants to go to some pretty powerful universities. She wants to be a doctor, which is like one of the things that you can't do without doing the thing.
Unfortunately, I think you should be able to test into that
You
profession.
should be, but you can't right now. Like if you want to be a stock trader, a tech guy, a programmer, a coder, a businessman, a philosopher, a historian, whatever, you don't have to go to college to do that. But to be a doctor, you got to do that. So I have, and I would do this ordinarily, but I am just prophylactically like just blasting her with as much information as I can, so that by the time she does get there, that she will at least have a baseline to deal with this indoctrination.
Have you taught her about compound interest?
We haven't talked about compound interest just yet, but I certainly will do that right after this call. But on the topic of the sick with the Antifa guy and the Project Veritas thing, you're absolutely right. That is just the lowest hanging fruit that they were able to scoop up and to identify. There have been reports all across the country. We've got the woman making the kids swear pledge allegiance to the queer flag in their classroom. Pledge allegiance to the queers, she says. This is on TikTok. It's been widely disseminated. It's not me being hateful or anything. There is very clear evidence where people say, well, you know what? It doesn't matter that the kids lost learning time and can read more poorly today compared to last year because we taught them what a riot was. We taught them what an insurrection was. We taught them what, white systems of oppression are. So all of these people, again, this goes back to exactly what the problem is in Afghanistan, aside from the competing military or monetary interests, is that the attention of our education apparatus is focused on the wrong thing. The attention of our education apparatus is focused on making these kids into little revolutionaries that pledge allegiance to the queer flag, that don't care about reading and math, but they only care about learning about rioting and insurrections. And that is what is happening. So therefore, every other result is negative because the primary attention is put on the wrong thing.
It's rot.
Yes, institutional rot.
It is institutional rot. It is the core foundations that make up the country and our culture are rotting and decaying. And they're being poisoned. They're not just rotting and decaying. They're being poisoned. They're being deliberately sabotaged. Right? We have saboteurs among us. That teacher is a saboteur. Right.
Okay. People will argue with me, but go back to the source documents, folks. The public education system in America was established to create a sense of patriotism in America.